Tonight, we step into the cool, leather-scented fitting room of a 1920s Salem Shoe Last Fitter, just as the factory windows begin to pale with morning. There is no hurry here, only the slow rhythm of the work. The floorboards hold the night's chill, and the long benches wait under a soft dusting of shavings, wax, and fine leather powder. You can hear the building before you see much of it. A pipe knocks gently in the wall. A cart rolls somewhere below. A clock, high and plain, gives one careful tick after another, as if it too has learned the pace of shoes. In 1920s Salem, the shoe last fitter works close to the heart of the trade, where wood, leather, measurement and patience meet in a quiet room above the street. We stand there together for a while, letting the morning gather itself around us. The lasts are lined on shelves by size and shape, some darkened by years of handling, some pale where the maple has been freshly shaved, all of them holding the ghost of a foot. You take one down with both hands, because a last has more weight than it seems to have. It's smooth in places and nicked in others, rounded at the heel, firm along the instep, blunt or tapered at the toe depending on the shoe it will guide. It isn't a foot exactly, it's more like a promise of a foot, made in wood, measured for work, meant to help leather become something useful. The Salem air outside carries a little salt from the harbor, a little coal smoke from chimneys, and the damp mineral smell that comes off brick streets before the day has warmed. Inside, the fitter's room smells of leather, paste, machine oil, and the faint sweetness of wood newly cut. If you stand still, you can separate them one by one, the way a practiced worker separates sizes by touch. You begin by checking the ticket. It's a small paper thing, creased at the corner, written by someone downstairs or at a desk near the cutting room. It tells you the style, the size, the width, the heel, and sometimes a small instruction that matters more than it looks. A little fuller across the ball, a narrower waist, a toe that must match last lot A, not last lot B, because the buyer wants the new line to look clean in the store window. The work is quiet, but it's not vague. A shoe last fitter in 1920s Salem doesn't simply pick a wooden form from a shelf and send it along. You inspect it, compare it, correct it, and make sure it belongs to the shoe being made that day. The shoe will pass through many hands, but the last gives it its shape, and so your hand rests at the beginning of a long chain of small decisions. You set the last on the bench. The wood makes a low, calm sound. Beside you are tools that have no need to announce themselves. A rasp with a worn handle, a scraper, bright at the edge, a ruler with darkened marks, a pair of calipers that open and close like a careful question. There are small wedges, bits of leather, scraps of paper pattern, and a pencil sharpened with a knife rather than a machine. You run your thumb over the toe. There's a rise there, hardly visible, but you can feel it under the skin. The leather upper, once pulled tight, will remember that rise. It may wrinkle. It may resist. It may make a line where the designer wanted smoothness. So you take up the scraper, and with a slow motion, you draw the edge across the wood. A thin curl lifts away. It falls onto the bench. The sound is small, almost private, and if you are already drowsy, you might miss it beneath the greater factory noises waking around you. But when you're the one doing the work, you hear it clearly. Scrape, pause, turn. Scrape, pause, feel. The hand learns before the mind explains. By now, the first machines below have begun to move, and the Salem shoe factory breathes itself awake through belts, pulleys, footsteps, and the soft thump of leather being stacked. You don't need to see the whole building to know it. You feel it through the bench. The cutting room has its own rhythm, broad and flat, like shears closing through hide. The stitching room has a finer sound, quick and threaded, with needles working along seams that will later wrap around the last you are fitting now. In Salem, by the 1920s, shoemaking belongs to factories, but it still depends on hands that notice small things. The old days of one shoemaker making one whole pair have mostly passed from the busy industrial streets, yet the work hasn't become faceless. It has only been divided, softened into stations, each person keeping one part of the knowledge warm. Your part is shape. You know the difference between a last meant for a sturdy walking shoe and one meant for a lighter dress shoe. You know where the instep must be generous, where the heel must hold, and where the toe may be fashionable without becoming cruel. The customer will never know your name, but their foot will know your work by evening. A last that is too full wastes leather and makes a shoe look heavy. A last that is too tight makes trouble for the laster, who must pull the upper over it and tack it down with force and care. A last that is wrong in a smaller way can travel through half the factory before the error shows itself, and then the day becomes less peaceful for everyone. So you work slowly. You check the pair. Left and right must agree, not as twins, but as partners. The outside line of the foot is not the same as the inside. The arch has its quiet lift. The ball needs room. The heel must sit with enough authority to give the shoe its backbone. You turn each last in your hand and let the light slide across the curves. The light matters. Morning comes through tall factory windows in broad, pale sheets, touching the floating dust and turning it briefly visible. Salem's weather can be damp even on fair days, and the wood feels different when the air has held rain overnight. You notice that too. The last fitter's senses become practical, without losing their tenderness, because every small change in the room can become a small change in the work. On the bench near your elbow sits a box of size stamps. They are metal, cold at first touch, each with a number and width to be pressed or checked against the record. You don't hurry with them. Numbers in this room are not abstract marks. They belong to feet, to shop orders, to stock rooms, to men and women who will walk home from a store with a cardboard box under one arm. The factory may produce hundreds of pairs, but the foot remains stubbornly human. That's one of the gentle truths of the trade. No matter how many machines hum below, no matter how regularly the orders arrive, each shoe still has to become comfortable on a living body. It has to bend where a person bends. It has to hold where a person needs holding. It has to look proper and still forgive the day's walking. You take another last down from the rack. This one has been used often. The tack holes near the bottom are dark, clustered like tiny weather marks. The top has a polished look where many hands have lifted it. Along the toe, someone once made a pencil note that has nearly disappeared into handling and dust. You can still make out part of it if you tilt it toward the window. The last has memory. Not memory like a person, of course, but the kind found in tools that stay near work for years. Its dents speak of hurried mornings. Its smoothed edges speak of repeated use. Its little repairs, a leather patch here, a filled nick there, tell you that factory labor is never only newness. Much of it is care for what already exists. You set it beside the order last. They are close, but not close enough. The toe spring differs by a shade, and the forepart has a little more swell than the ticket calls for. You reach for the calipers and place one point against the widest part of the ball. The tool opens with a soft resistance. You compare, adjust, and compare again, listening to the faint scrape of metal against wood. It's a narrow kind of attention. It suits the room. There are no grand gestures in last fitting. The work is made of checking, feeling, correcting, returning. Your hands move in the same small circle again and again, and there is comfort in that circle. It gives the morning a shape, the way the last gives the shoe a shape, and for a while, nothing asks to be larger than it is. Across the room, another worker clears his throat. A stool creaks. Someone sets down a mug, probably coffee gone lukewarm, its tin rim clicking on the bench. The smell drifts faintly through the leather smell, bitter and ordinary. You don't speak much at this hour. Words would not be unwelcome, but they aren't needed yet. The room has enough sound. The shoe last fitter in 1920s Salem often works between departments, half craftsman and half interpreter. You read the designer's intention in the pattern, the production needs in the order ticket, and the practical truth in the wood itself. Your job is to make those things agree quietly before the shoe moves on. Sometimes you add, rather than take away. A last can be built up with a small piece of leather or wood where more fullness is needed. You cut the piece thin, trim it close, and fix it in place with care. Then you smooth the edge until your fingertips can pass over it without catching. The patch must become part of the form, not a lump, not a guess, not a favor asked of the leather later. You test it with your palm. The palm is better than the eye for certain questions. It feels unevenness that hides from sight. It finds a sudden flatness along a curve, or a ridge near the toe, or a hollow where the upper might sink. The hand doesn't make a speech about these things, it simply pauses. Then the tool returns. The scraper moves, the last turns. Downstairs, a bell rings once, not loudly, just enough to mark that the workday has fully begun, and the Salem Shoe Last Fitter settles into the steady hours that belong to wood, leather, and repeated touch. As the morning lengthens, we move with you from the first quiet inspection into the deeper rhythm of fitting, where the shelves empty by inches and the bench gathers its soft brown dust. The next order is for a row of women's walking shoes, neat and modest, with a toe that follows fashion but doesn't lean too sharply into it. In Salem, shoes like these might be sent far beyond the streets where they were made, packed in boxes, loaded by rail, and placed in shops where no one would picture this upper room with its cold window glass and worn tools. But we picture it now. You stand at the bench, sleeves rolled just enough, collar softened by the day's warmth. The room has changed since dawn. The chill has lifted from the floorboards. The pipes have stopped knocking. The air is fuller now, carrying dust, talk from the hallway, and the steady oil-dark smell of machines working below. A last is selected first by size, then by style, then by the less obvious knowledge that lives in habit. You know which rack holds the newer forms. You know which older ones need watching. You know which batch came back last month because the heel seat was not clean enough for the pattern. Memory becomes a map of the room. You take down several pairs and line them up. Their wooden toes point toward you. There's something almost companionable about them. These forms made for feet but standing without bodies. They wait with a patient look, though of course the patience is yours, placed upon them by long hours of work. You examine each one as if greeting a familiar tool. Heel, waist, instep, ball, toe. Then again from the other side. The measuring stick lies along the bottom. You check the length, then the width. The marks are small, but you have read small marks for years, and they no longer feel small to you. They feel like the day's language. A fraction shaved here may decide whether the upper pulls smoothly. A little fullness preserved there may decide whether the finished shoe feels kind after supper. Leather changes as it's worked. That's worth remembering. It arrives from the cutting room flat, shaped from patterns, smelling of hide, dye, and the clean mineral scent left by tanning. It has firmness, but it also has persuasion in it. When dampened, pulled, warmed by hands, and held over the last, it begins to accept the curve it has been given. The last fitter's quiet task is to make that curve trustworthy. You hold one form near the window. The light shows a shallow scratch. It's not deep, yet you smooth it. The upper may never feel it. The finished shoe may never show it. Still, the work asks for this kind of attention, because small neglect has a way of traveling, especially in a factory where each person depends on the last person's care. The rasp is rougher than the scraper. You use it sparingly. Its teeth bite into the wood with a dry, close sound, and the handle sits heavy in your palm. There is a smell when the rasp works, fresh and pale, like a board cut in a shed. It rises through the darker scent of leather and oil. For a moment, the room feels less like a factory and more like a carpenter's corner. Then you smooth the mark away. The scraper refines what the rasp begins. Fine dust gathers along the edge of the bench and clings lightly to your cuff. You brush it aside with the back of your hand. Some of it falls to the floor, where it joins old dust, thread ends, tiny leather crescents, and the dull shine of wax rubbed into boards by thousands of steps. A young runner appears at the door. He carries more tickets. His hair is still damp from the morning air, and his shoes make quick sounds in the hall, quick enough to remind you that not everyone has learned the slower pace of this room. He places the papers in the tray, glances at the shelves, and goes again. The door closes with a wooden sigh. You don't chase the pace. That's part of the skill. A Salem Shoe Last Fitter in the 1920s works within factory time, but not entirely under it. The orders must move. The departments must be fed. Yet the fitting itself cannot be bullied into speed. The eye must look, the hand must confirm, and the tool must remove only what should be removed. There's humility in that. Wood does not return once cut away, so you take less than you think, then feel again. You let the form rest in the cradle of your hand. You turn it against the light. You compare it to its mate, because a pair of shoes must leave the factory with quiet agreement between them. One cannot be proud while the other is shy. By late morning, the room warms further. Someone opens a high window by a few inches. Outside, Salem speaks in softened pieces. A cartwheel passes over uneven stone. A distant whistle calls from the direction of the rail line or the harbor. The city is not silent, but through the factory walls its sounds arrive rounded and low, like things remembered after waking. You may smell the harbor only faintly. Mostly you smell work. Leather has several smells at once. There's the firm scent of sole leather, dense and earthy. There's the sharper smell of dyed uppers. There's paste, wax, dust, and the black thread used elsewhere in the building. When the day grows warm, these smells rise together, and your clothes carry them home. That too is part of the job. Workers often bring the factory with them in small ways. A cuff marked by dust, a thumb darkened near the nail, a lunch pail that smells faintly of coffee and leather, even after it has been washed. The last fitter may leave the bench, but the work lingers kindly, as scent, habit, and tiredness in the wrists. At noon you eat simply. Bread, perhaps, a bit of cheese, an apple if the season has been generous, or something wrapped in paper from home. You sit near the window or on a low bench, depending on the room and the weather. Talk loosens now. Someone mentions a street repair. Someone mentions a cousin in Lynn. Someone says the new style's toe is too narrow, and several heads lift in quiet agreement. The shoe towns know one another. Salem, Lynn, Haverhill, Brockton, Peabody, with its tanneries and leather men, all belong to a region where shoes and leather have shaped wages, streets, families, and the smell of whole neighborhoods. You don't need to make a lecture of it. You know it, because the freight comes in, the orders go out, and half the people you meet have a relative somewhere in the trade. After lunch, the bench waits again. The tools are where you left them. The room is brighter now, and less private than it was in the first hour. Voices carry more easily. Feet move in the hall. The factory has found its full stride, and you return to your own small station within it. Fitting lasts for shoes that will pass from hand to hand until they are ready for streets you may never walk. And when the noon hour has folded back into work, we follow the Salem Shoe Last Fitter into the patient afternoon, where repetition deepens and the smallest corrections begin to feel almost like breathing. The afternoon begins with a quieter kind of heaviness, the sort that comes after food and warm air, when the factory keeps moving, but the body would gladly slow. You feel it first in your shoulders, then in the hands, where the morning's careful gripping has left a small tiredness. The Salem Shoe Last Fitter learns to work with that feeling, not against it, because steady hands are not always fresh hands. They are hands that know how to continue. The bench has taken on the look of a small weather system. Pale dust lies near the scraper. Darker leather scraps gather by the rule. A few paper tickets curl at their edges, softened by the damp breath of the room. You straighten them with 2 fingers, not because anyone has asked, but because order helps the mind rest. In work like this, neatness is not showy. It is simply another tool. You choose the next pair of lasts from the shelf, and the wood feels warm now from the room rather than cold from storage. The shape is for a sturdy shoe, something meant for walking on brick, factory floors, wooden porches, and the hard-packed streets that dry slowly after rain. The heel is practical, the toe is rounded, the instep has a little height to it, enough to give the shoe a plain and useful kindness. In 1920s Salem, practical shoes are not humble things. They are the daily machinery of ordinary lives, carrying shop clerks, teachers, factory hands, delivery men, mothers with market baskets, and older people who know every cracked flagstone on their way to church. You don't see all these walkers from your fitting bench, but you work for them all the same. The last carries an image of their movement before the shoe ever meets the street. You turn the right last over and examine the bottom. There are tack holes scattered in the wood, some fresh, some darkened and widened by repeated use. A last is meant to be handled, pinned, pulled against, and sometimes argued with by leather that would rather stay flat. You run a fingertip along the feather edge, where the upper will be drawn down, and the line must be clear enough to guide the work without cutting harshly into it. The feather edge is a small border, but borders matter in quiet trades. Too sharp, and the leather marks badly. Too soft, and the laster loses definition, making a shoe that looks tired before it has taken a step. So you refine the edge with a narrow file, gently, almost as if cleaning a thread from cloth. The file whispers along the wood. The sound is thin, regular, and close to the ear. We stay beside you as the afternoon settles into its long middle. The Salem Shoe Last Fitter has no audience, no display window, and no finished pair to admire at the end of each hour. Instead, your reward is a clean comparison between left and right, a ticket properly matched, and the knowledge that the next worker will not have to fight what you have prepared. It is a modest satisfaction, but it has weight. A foreman passes the door and slows without entering. His shoes make a firmer sound than the runner's, and his watch chain glints against his vest when the hallway light catches it. He asks after a set of lasts due for a narrow-widths order. His voice is not sharp. It is the voice of a man balancing many small delays, hoping they will stay small. You point to the rack beside the far wall. He nods and moves on. The room returns to itself. That is how many factory conversations go, brief as footsteps and nearly as ordinary. You keep the interruption in your mind only long enough to place the narrow-width order nearer the center of the bench. Then the earlier rhythm returns. Read the ticket. Select the pair. Compare the mate. Feel the line. Adjust where the hand says to adjust. The narrow lasts are less forgiving. You can sense it before the tool touches them. There is less breadth across the ball, a cleaner waist, a more particular heel. For a shoe to be narrow without becoming severe, the shape must keep its grace. You lift the left last and feel the side with your thumb, where the leather will pull around and seek any unfairness in the wood. Your thumb stops at a ridge. It is barely there. Another worker might miss it, especially late in the day. But you know the ridge will become a crease, and the crease will become a complaint. Not always spoken, perhaps only felt by someone taking the shoe off at night with relief instead of comfort. So you take up the scraper again. The blade slides across the ridge, and a pale shaving loosens like a thin strip of apple peel. There is a quiet mercy in removing what does not belong. The work teaches that slowly. You're not making the last beautiful in any decorative sense, and you're not leaving a signature for someone to find. You are clearing a path for leather, thread, foot, and day. You are making one small difficulty disappear before it can travel any farther. That can be enough for an afternoon. The window glass has warmed under the light, and dust glows near it whenever someone crosses the room. Outside, the brick walls of nearby buildings hold the sun with a dull reddish steadiness. A gull calls somewhere toward the harbor, thin and distant, and for a moment the sound slips into the factory like a reminder of tide water. Salem has always belonged partly to the sea, even in rooms full of lasts and leather. You might have grown up with stories of ships, spices, and old counting houses. But by the 1920s, the city also carries the steadier sound of wage work. Factories, workshops, tanneries nearby, rail deliveries, carts, invoices, lunch pails, and the small economy of families all shape the day. The Salem Shoe Last Fitter stands inside that later history, where old seaport air meets the practical smell of soles, wax, and machine oil. The lasts themselves may have come from a last shop, shaped by specialized makers who understood foot forms as carefully as cabinet makers understand wood grain. Some are made of maple or beech, close-grained and hard enough to endure pulling and tacking. They arrive already formed, but not always ready for every order. Your fitting brings them into agreement with the shoe being made here, today, under these windows. For this particular line, you check a notation on the ticket, then bend closer to the bench. The print is smudged, and someone has written over it in pencil. You tilt it toward the light, reading slowly. The order calls for a slightly higher toe box. That means the leather must have room to rise without looking swollen, and the last must suggest the lift with restraint. You set the ticket down and select a thin build-up piece. The build-up leather is stiff but workable. It has a dry, warm feel, and its edge smells faintly sharper when trimmed. You cut it to shape with a small knife, keeping your fingers curled safely back from the blade. The knife presses through with a soft resistance. You test the piece against the toe, trim again, and hold it where it must settle. It looks too simple for the thought it contains. Then comes the smoothing. Once fixed, the added piece must vanish into the last shape, as if it had always been there. You use the scraper first, then a finer abrasive, working the edges down until the transition is gone beneath your palm. Your hand passes over the toe again and again, not impatiently, but in a slow conversation. The last answers in pressure, curve, and silence. A worker from the stitching floor comes in carrying a sample upper. It hangs from his hand like a soft, unfinished promise, dark leather folded and stitched, but not yet given full body. He places it on the bench, and together you compare it with the last. We can feel the room narrow around this shared attention. The factory outside continues. But here, the question is simple. Will this upper sit well? You ease the leather over the toe without forcing it. It's only a check, not the true lasting, but it tells you what the ticket cannot. The upper draws snugly across the front, then hesitates near the instep. Your thumb presses gently, and you see where a little more fullness is needed. The stitcher watches without speaking. He knows you are not delaying him. You are saving him trouble later. The leather comes away with a faint creak. You mark the last in pencil, a small curved note that only this task needs to understand. Then you shave, smooth, and test again. The second fitting sits more kindly. The stitcher gives a small nod and takes the upper back. There is no flourish, no ceremony, just a practical exchange of trust between two parts of the same day. By mid-afternoon, the work has changed again, not in kind, but in feeling, as the body grows accustomed to repetition and the mind begins to notice smaller sounds between the larger ones. The Salem Shoe Last Fitter keeps going in this softened hour, when every tool seems familiar and every shelf has become part of your reach. You no longer think where the scraper lies. Your hand simply finds it. There is comfort in that kind of knowing. It is not the bright comfort of novelty, but the low comfort of belonging to a task. You know the bench's uneven spot. You know which stool leg complains. You know how the afternoon light reaches the third shelf but not the fourth. You know which last has a repaired heel, and which pair must be checked twice because the left once warped in damp weather. Wood moves with weather, though slowly. It swells and eases, tightens and settles, carrying the room's climate in its fibers. In a damp Salem season, with fog rising from the water and rain darkening the streets, the last fitter must be patient with small changes. You may set a form aside to dry or compare it against a master more carefully than usual. The difference can be felt before it is measured. The master last stays apart from the working lasts. It is not used in the rougher stages. It is a standard, a reference, a quiet authority on the shelf. When doubt comes, you bring the working last to it and compare line against line, curve against curve. The master is smooth, cleaner than the others, with fewer marks of tax and strain. It has the calmness of something preserved for judgment. You lift it with care, not reverence exactly, but respect. Its wood feels smoother, and the edges hold their intended shape. Beside it, the working last shows its history more plainly. You compare the ball width, the heel seat, the curve through the arch. The differences are not dramatic. Nothing in this room is dramatic. But the last fitter lives among small differences, and small differences keep the factory honest. When you return the master to its place, you do it gently. A tool that preserves measure is a kind of quiet memory for the workshop. Without it, every correction might wander a little farther from where it began. With it, the day can return to center. You turn back to the working pair and make the smallest adjustment at the heel, shaving less than a thought, then smoothing until the line feels true. The heel is its own world. It must hold without biting, guide without gripping too hard, and give the finished shoe a clean seat for the counter and sole work that will follow. You run your finger around it slowly. The curve should not surprise the hand. It should lead it. A good heel on a last feels almost inevitable, as if the wood had grown that way and merely needed to be found. Below, a machine belt slaps in a slow repeating pattern, then steadies again. Someone laughs once, not loudly, and the laugh rises through the floorboards, softened by distance and machinery. You hear a chair scrape. You hear leather stacked flat with a dull clap. These are not interruptions. They are the weather of the building, and after years of work, you may notice them only when they change. The Salem Shoe Last Fitter listens for changes because changes often mean work is about to arrive. A pause downstairs may mean a question. A faster step in the hall may mean an order is late. A repeated call from one room to another may mean a mismatch of pattern and last. The factory speaks in these little signals, and you learn them the way you learn the street sounds outside your own window. Another ticket arrives, this one for a sample pair. Samples require a slightly different attention. They are not yet the broad run, they are the suggestion of what may become one. A buyer may see them, a salesman may carry them. A decision may depend on whether the line looks clean, balanced, and easy to imagine on a customer's foot. So the last must serve both fit and appearance. You select a cleaner pair, the wood has fewer scars, the toe line is elegant without being delicate, and the waist draws inward, with quiet restraint. You set them side by side, and study the silhouette. A shoe begins as a side view in someone's mind. The curve must please the eye before the foot ever proves it. In your room, the practical and the graceful meet without any need to announce themselves. The sample upper is pale brown, soft enough to take light along its grain. You hold it near the last and smell the finish. Faintly sweet, a little chemical, a little earthy. The leather has a surface almost like warm paper. Though deeper and more alive under the fingers, it will darken slightly where stretched. It will shine where handled. You can already see how the toe must be treated. You make a note for a smoother crown. Then you remove a barely visible flat place where the toe top settles too abruptly. The scraper makes its soft sound again. Fine dust settles on the pale brown leather, and you brush it away before it can mark the surface. A last fitter's hands must do rough and delicate things in the same hour, sometimes in the same minute, and that balance becomes part of your body. There is a small stove or radiator somewhere nearby, warming the room unevenly. Close to it, the air feels dry. Near the window, there is still a cool draft at the ankles. You shift your weight now and then, one foot to the other, letting your knees ease without leaving the bench. The floor has a shine in certain places where many workers have stood, and your place is one of them. Afternoon brings a different appetite than noon. Not hunger exactly, but the wish for tea, coffee, or a breath outside. You may have a small tin cup and something warm if the factory allows it, or you may wait until the shift ends. For now, you work through the feeling. You swallow, you flex your fingers, you pick up the next pair, and the next small question opens in your hands. The question is always the same and always different. Does this shape belong to this shoe? Will it draw the leather kindly? Will it match its mate? Will it stand up to repeated work without wandering from the form? You answer, not with speeches, but with checking, scraping, patching, smoothing, and comparing. The answer accumulates quietly on the bench, one prepared last after another. As the light through the high windows begins to lower, we move toward the later afternoon, when the Salem Shoe Last Fitter must finish what can be finished and leave tomorrow's work in a state that will not trouble the morning. There is a particular softness in the factory at this hour, though the machines still run. The day has lost its first brightness. The windows hold a paler slanting light, and the corners of the room deepen by degrees. You notice the shadow under the bench, the darker spaces between shelves, and the pale shine of worn wood where your hands have touched the same place again and again. Late afternoon is a time for sorting. You gather completed pairs and place them where they belong, each ticket kept with its forms, each correction checked once more before the last moves on. The Salem Shoe Last Fitter does not abandon a pair just because the main work is done. You look again at the toe, the heel, the instep, the mate. You let your palm pass over the surface like a final quiet word. A last may be tied to its order with string, or placed in a marked tray, or set on a rack that leads toward the lasting room. The method depends on the factory, but the spirit is the same. You are sending shape onward. The next hands will pull lever, set tacks, draw the upper tight, and begin turning separate pieces into a shoe. Your work will disappear inside that process, and that is how it should be. Still, disappearing is not the same as being absent. The fitter's care remains under the leather, inside the clean line of the toe, behind the comfort of the instep, and beneath the symmetry of the pair. When a finished shoe sits level on a counter, part of that balance began here, when the vamp lies smooth without strain. Part of that ease came from this room. Quiet work often survives by becoming invisible. You sharpen the pencil with a small knife. The shavings curl away darker than the wood dust, smelling faintly of cedar and graphite. The pencil point need not be perfect, only clean enough to mark a line without smearing. You write on a ticket, slowly, because a rushed note can become tomorrow's confusion. Style, size, width, correction. The letters lean slightly from long habit. The inked stamps sit in their box, and one has left a mark on the side of your finger. You rub it with your thumb, but it remains, a bluish smudge in the crease. Workers collect such traces without thinking. A thread on a sleeve, a wax shine near the cuff, a nick on a thumbnail from a tool that slipped only enough to remind you it was sharp. The body keeps a quiet record of the shift. Across the room, the older fitter begins putting away a set of forms. His movements are economical. He does not bend twice where once will do. He does not look for what has already found its place in his memory. You may have learned from someone like him, years ago, standing where a beginner stands, watching how little force is needed when a person truly understands a tool. Learning this trade would not have happened all at once. At first, you might have carried lasts, sorted tickets, swept shavings, and watched more than you touched. You would have learned sizes by sight, then widths by handling, then the subtler differences between styles. Someone would have corrected your hand, not harshly perhaps, but firmly enough. More off the side, less at the toe. Feel it again. Feel it again is nearly the whole education. You can be told measurements, and you can read tickets, but the final judgment lives in the hand. That is why the work cannot be reduced entirely to rules. A last fitter learns through repetition until attention becomes almost bodily. You feel high spots as interruptions. You feel a poor curve as a kind of unease. You feel a well-fitted shape as calm beneath the palm. The factory clock moves toward the end of the shift, though not quickly enough for those who are tired. You don't stare at it. That only makes time grow stubborn. Instead, you take the next order and let the minutes gather around the task. The last is heavy, the ticket plain, the tool familiar. In this way, the day carries itself forward without being pulled. Outside, Salem's late afternoon gathers people back into the streets. Delivery wagons move more slowly now. Shop doors open and close. Children's voices may rise from a side street, thin through brick and glass. Somewhere, supper is being prepared, coal stove shaken, kettles filled, onions sliced, bread cut. The factory remains inside its work, but the world beyond it is already turning toward evening. You may think of home briefly, then the scraper pulls you back. The piece in your hand needs a small correction at the waist. You study the curve and remove only a little. The last is for a shoe that must look trim without pinching. It is a common challenge because fashion likes the idea of narrowness, while feet ask for mercy. The fitter works between these two wishes, giving the eye what it expects and the foot what it quietly needs. In the 1920s, styles shift with hemlines, shop windows, catalogs, and city habits. Shoes may be buttoned, laced, strapped, polished, plain, stout, or neat enough for a Sunday visit. Yet, beneath every change, the foot remains shaped by bone, muscle, walking, standing, and age. A Salem Shoe Last Fitter knows that fashion may speak loudly, but the foot has the longer memory. You compare the pair once more. Left, then right. The light is lower now, so you bring them closer to the window. The glass is cooler than before when your wrist brushes it. Dust still floats, but less brightly. You angle the lasts until their outlines sharpen. There, at the toe, the right one carries a touch more fullness than the left. It is slight, but the pair would tell on itself later. You mark it and begin again. The correction takes several minutes. Not many, but enough to slow the order near the end of the day. You accept that. A hurried mismatch is not quicker when it has to be repaired. The scraper works. The palm checks. The pair returns to the light. This time the two forms agree. You place them together, ticket tucked between them, and the bench seems a little clearer. Late work has its own sound. The morning's freshness is gone, and with it the sharper strike of new energy. Tools are set down more softly. Voices grow lower. Steps in the hallway lose their snap. Even the machines below seem to settle, though they may be moving at the same speed. What changes is the ear. A tired worker hears the day through a thicker cloth. When the bell for the final stretch seems near but has not yet rung, we follow you into the last careful tasks of the shift, where putting things in order becomes part of the work itself. The Salem Shoe Last Fitter must leave the room ready for morning, because morning is easier when yesterday has been kind. You gather loose shavings into a small pile and brush them from the bench. The brush has stiff bristles, worn unevenly from use. It makes a dry, whispering sound over wood, pushing dust, leather crumbs, and fine curls into the tray. The surface beneath appears again, scarred and dependable. You wipe the scraper and check its edge. A dull tool makes rough work, and rough work asks for more repair than it saves. The file returns to its hook. The calipers close and rest beside the ruler. The knife is placed where a hand will find it safely, not buried under paper, not left near an edge. Such small habits are a form of care for yourself and anyone who shares the room. The tickets are stacked by order. Completed pairs are separated from those still needing attention. A partly corrected last receives a pencil note clear enough for your own tired morning eyes. You do not trust memory entirely, because sleep changes the room between shifts. What feels obvious at dusk may look uncertain at dawn, so you write the note and tie it firmly with the form. There is something peaceful about a prepared bench. It suggests that the day, though long, has not scattered you beyond recovery. The tools return to their places. The wood dust is gathered. The unanswered work is named. You can leave because the room has been brought back into a kind of balance, and balance is one of the quiet pleasures of repetitive labor. The last few orders still sit in the tray, but they belong to tomorrow now. Every factory has this handoff from present to future, this agreement that work continues even when one worker goes home. The lasts will wait in the dim room. The tickets will curl a little more at their edges. Dust will settle while the building cools. In the morning, you will take them up again. A final check of the racks tells you whether anything is missing. You scan the shelves, size by size, style by style, not reading every mark, but feeling the pattern of where things should be. An empty place speaks differently from a full one. A misplaced pair can cost time later. You move one set from the wrong shelf to the right one, and the room feels more settled. Someone in the hall calls a name. Not yours, perhaps. Another worker answers, and the exchange fades toward the stairs. The building has begun its evening loosening. Men and women straighten their backs, cover machines, stack materials, collect coats, and glance toward windows where the day is thinning. The factory has held them for hours, and now it releases them slowly, department by department. You wash your hands if there is a basin nearby. The water may be cold, and the soap may be plain and hard, with little kindness in it. Dust darkens the water as it runs from your fingers. It gathers under the nails and around the knuckles, reluctant to leave. You rub carefully, not to erase the work entirely, but to return your hands to yourself for the evening. The smell remains. Leather stays in the skin, so does wood dust, faintly, and the metallic touch of tools. Even after washing, you can lift your hand near your face and know where you have spent the day. For a Salem Shoe Last Fitter in the 1920s, this smell is not unpleasant. It is the smell of wages, skill, routine, and belonging, braided together so closely that it would be strange not to carry it home. You put on your coat. The fabric feels cooler than the room, and for a moment your shoulders notice its weight. Maybe there is a cap from a peg, a lunch pail from under the bench, a folded newspaper tucked into a pocket. The room behind you still holds the shape of your labor. The bench waits. The shelves stand full and half full. The clock keeps moving without concern. When you step into the hallway, the sound changes at once. The fitting room's close sounds open into stair noise, footsteps, voices, and the hollow echo of a factory at shift's end. You descend with others, not in a rush, but in a common current. Wooden steps dip slightly in the center from years of use. A handrail shines where palms have passed over it. At the lower floor, warmer smells rise from places closer to the machines. Oil, Leather, paste, damp wool coats, and the breath of many workers mingle in the air. The door ahead opens and closes, letting in a strip of evening. Each time it opens, Salem enters. Cool air, street grit, coal smoke, and the far scent of tide. You move toward it with the day's tiredness resting low in your arms. Outside, the city feels wider than it did in the morning. The sky may be grey, or rose at the edges, or already dim in winter months when work outlasts daylight. Brick walls give back the day's remaining warmth. Windows shine above the street. A cart passes, then a motor car, its engine sounding still a little novel against older cobbles and horse-worn routes. You walk with the mild stiffness of someone who has stood at a bench for hours. Your hands are empty now, but they remember the size of the lasts. They remember heel curves and toe springs, the small pressure of calipers, the bite of the rasp, the smooth drag of the scraper. This is how work follows a person quietly. Not as a burden exactly, but as a pattern still moving inside the body. The Salem Shoe Last Fitter goes home through streets shaped by many trades. There may be shoe workers near you, clerks, dockmen, tannery hands from nearby towns, shop girls, boys with parcels, women carrying wrapped purchases, and older men who still speak of different kinds of work from earlier years. Everyone moves at a pace learned from the day they have had. The city becomes a collection of tired rhythms. Perhaps you stop at a small shop. Perhaps you go straight home. The details change from worker to worker, but the feeling is familiar. Wages are counted. Supper is thought about. A letter may be waiting. A child may ask a question before your coat is fully off. The ordinary evening receives you without ceremony, and that too is part of the work's meaning. At home, your shoes come off. You notice them, of course. A person who spends the day with lasts cannot help noticing shoes. The wear at the heel, the crease across the vamp, the way one sole has thinned more than the other. You may think briefly that your own pair needs repair, then let the thought rest until Saturday or payday. Even rest is shaped by the trades we know best. The evening meal is simple and welcome. Steam rises from a plate. A chair holds your weight differently than the factory stool. The room smells of food instead of leather, though leather still lingers faintly in your cuffs. Voices are softer here, or perhaps they only feel softer because no machines move below them. You eat, and your hands, so exact all day, become ordinary hands again around a fork, a cup, a piece of bread. Night gathers beyond the windows. The factory is behind you, but not gone. In the darkened fitting room, the lasts sit in rows, their wooden forms cooling slowly after the warmth of the day. Tickets rest where you left them. The scraper lies clean. The master last remains on its shelf, holding the standard through the night. Nothing there is awake, and yet the room feels ready. And as the evening settles over Salem, we stay with the quiet afterimage of the work, before the next morning brings us back to the bench, the tickets, and the first wooden form waiting in your hands. The next morning begins before the room has fully warmed. The stairs are dim again, and the factory smells of yesterday held overnight in brick, timber, leather, and dust. You climb with the same lunch pail, the same coat, and a body that remembers the path without needing instruction. The Salem Shoe Last Fitter returns not to a new world, but to a familiar one, made fresh by sleep. The fitting room is still. For a few minutes before the building gathers its full sound, you can hear small things clearly. A sleeve brushing a doorway, the click of a latch, the low settling creak of wood somewhere in the wall. Your breath shows faintly if the morning is cold enough, and the bench feels cool under your fingertips when you set down your things. You look first at the note you left. It makes sense. That is a small mercy from yesterday's self to today's. The partly corrected last waits beside it, tied with string and marked at the waist. You take it up and feel the area in question before reading the words again. The hand remembers, but the note confirms. Together, they bring you gently back into the work. Morning light is different from afternoon light. It is less forgiving in some ways, clearer along edges, cool across the surface of wood. You hold the last near the window and see the faint ridge you meant to remove. The scraper starts its small song, not hurried, not sleepy, just steady. The first shaving of the day curls away, and the room begins in that modest sound to become itself again, Soon the factory fills around you. The early quiet gives way to footsteps, voices, belts, wheels, and the layered pulse of production. You may not notice the exact moment it happens. 1 minute the room is spare and cold. The next, the whole building is alive. The Salem Shoe Last Fitter works within that swelling sound, neither above it nor below it, simply part of it. The order tray has gained new tickets. Some are ordinary runs. Some are repeats of styles already familiar from the week. One is marked for correction after a problem downstairs. You set that one aside, not to avoid it, but to give it proper attention when the bench is clear. A returned problem is never just a nuisance. It is information making its way back to the source. First, you finish the weighting last. Then you check its mate. The two now agree well enough that the leather should draw evenly, and you place them with the completed forms. The morning's first task closes neatly. This matters more than it might seem. Beginning with a finished correction gives the day a small sense of direction. The bench has accepted you back. The tools have found your hands again. Now you take up the returned problem. The ticket says the upper pulled tight across the inside joint. That means the area near the ball of the foot did not give enough room where the pattern expected it. You can imagine the laster downstairs feeling the resistance, trying to draw the leather smooth, knowing something was not quite right. We follow that trouble back here, gently, without blame. The last looks right at first glance. That is often how mistakes survive. You set it beside its master and compare the inside line carefully. There it is, a lean place where the curve should be fuller. Not large, not careless, but enough. You mark it with pencil and prepare a build-up, thin at the edge and fuller at the center, shaped almost like a small leaf. The leather patch warms under your fingers as you trim it. You fit it to the inside joint, test it, remove it, trim again, and set it back. The paste has a sharp, slightly sweet smell that rises when opened. You use only what is needed. Too much makes mess. Too little makes failure. As with most things in this room, the right amount is learned by doing. Once the patch is fixed, you smooth its edges until the last no longer feels repaired. It feels corrected. That difference matters to the hand. A repair sits on top of a thing. A correction joins it. You test with your palm, then with the sample upper sent back from below. This time, the leather travels across the joint with less strain. The problem has softened. You send it back with a note. No drama follows. The factory absorbs the correction and continues. That is one of the calming truths of a well-practiced workplace. Problems arise, are named, are handled, and the work folds around them. Not every day is easy, and not every mistake is small, but much of the labor consists of these quiet repairs that keep the larger motion from stopping. By mid-morning, the sun has reached the windows more fully, and we move deeper into the daily routine of the Salem Shoe Last Fitter, where the work of shape becomes a patient conversation between standard forms and living feet. You might wonder, as you handle another pair, how many feet can be represented by one wooden form? The answer is imperfectly, and everyone in the trade knows it. Sizes and widths make useful order from human variety, but no row of shelves can hold every foot exactly. Some feet are broad at the ball, narrow at the heel. Some have high insteps. Some carry the marks of years spent standing. The last is a compromise, but a thoughtful one. It gathers common shapes into a form the factory can use, then asks the fitter to keep that form honest. You are not measuring a customer in this room. You are preparing a standard that must serve many unseen people reasonably well. There is a quiet generosity in that, because good ordinary objects often come from thoughtful compromises. You feel it especially in walking shoes. A fine evening shoe may prize line and polish, but a walking shoe must live with the body through errands, weather, work, and waiting. It needs room for the toes to settle after hours. It needs a waist that supports without announcing itself. It needs a heel that does not wander. The last carries all these requirements before leather ever covers it. The next form has a scar near the instep. It has been filled once, but the filler has worn slightly below the surrounding wood. You can feel the dip. It would be easy to ignore, because the mark is old and the surface mostly sound. But the upper may find it. Leather is sensitive in its own way. It records pressure, hollow, and pull more faithfully than a tired eye expects. You clean the dip and fill it again. smoothing the area with careful strokes. The material smells different from the wood, flatter and less alive, but once worked down, it becomes part of the surface. You wait a moment, then test. Your palm passes over without pause. That is the sign you wanted. Not perfection for display, but usefulness restored. A clock ticks somewhere above the door, and its sound comes and goes depending on the machines below. Sometimes you hear it clearly. Sometimes it disappears entirely. Factory time is like that. It is strict on paper, with start bells, meal bells, order dates, and pay envelopes. Yet inside the work it stretches and softens. A difficult last can make 10 minutes vanish. A steady run can carry an hour away like a smooth current. You settle into that current. Ticket after ticket, pair after pair. Your body finds the pattern again, and the senses remain open without strain. The air is warmer now. The leather smells stronger. The scraper handle has taken heat from your hand. A small ache near the thumb appears, fades, returns, and is accepted as part of the day's weather. A visitor might find the room plain. Shelves, benches, tools, workers, windows, dust. But we have stayed long enough to see that plainness is only the surface. Under it lies a careful world of measure, touch, memory, and adjustment. The Salem Shoe Last Fitter reads wood the way a compositor reads type or a weaver reads thread, finding meaning in what seems at first like sameness. The sameness is never empty. This pair has a firmer heel. That pair needs checking at the toe. This order repeats yesterday's style, but in a wider fitting. That last came from the lower rack and always seems to carry a slight flatness on the left side. You remember, not because you try to remember everything, but because repetition has made a home for knowledge in your hands. When the noon bell approaches, the body knows before the ear does. Your stomach has its own clock. Your shoulders ask to drop. Your eyes lift more often toward the windows. Still, you finish the pair in hand. Leaving it half done would disturb the shape of the morning. You make the final pass, compare the mates, attach the ticket, and set them on the completed shelf. The bell rings, the room exhales. Lunch begins with the scrape of stools and the opening of pails. Paper unfolds. Tin lids lift. Someone pours coffee from a bottle wrapped in cloth to keep it warm. Though it is only lukewarm now, you sit near the bench but turn slightly away from the work, giving your eyes a different distance. Even in the same room, a body can make a small border between labor and rest. The talk is mild. Weather, wages, a streetcar delay. A baseball score someone read in the paper. A complaint about a batch of leather that stretched more than it should. Nothing is pressed too hard. Workers often know how to keep lunchtime talk at a human size because the day still has hours left in it. You listen, answer a little, and let the warmth of food settle you. Perhaps someone speaks of a new machine in another department. Factories in the 1920s are full of such changes, not always sudden, often gradual, each one altering the old balance between hand and mechanism. The last fitter hears these things with interest, maybe caution, maybe simple curiosity. Machines can cut, stitch, press and finish with remarkable speed, but the hand still has its place where judgment lives. You look at your own hands while another worker talks. The nails are clean enough, though not truly clean. The skin near the thumb has thickened. A small nick near one finger has closed, but remains visible. These hands know tools better than they know stillness. At lunch, they rest around a cup, and even then, you may feel them faintly measuring the curve of its handle. After lunch, the room is slower for several minutes. Everyone returns, but not all at once inside themselves. You put away the paper from your meal, wipe a crumb from the bench, and pull the next ticket close. The first movements after lunch are almost ceremonial. Touch the tool, read the order, find the shelf, lift the last. Let the work gather you back without force. And as noon passes into the long second half of the day, we return with the Salem Shoe Last Fitter to the place where ordinary repetition becomes almost restful, and the afternoon opens one measured task at a time. The afternoon opens with the ticket tray turned slightly toward the light, so the pencil marks can be read without squinting. You smooth the top sheet with the side of your hand and let your eyes settle on the words. The order is familiar, a medium run of playing shoes with a durable toe and a sensible heel, the kind that asks for accuracy more than ornament. In Salem, such work fills many hours. You lift the first pair from the rack and feel their weight together. The two lasts knock softly when their heels touch, a dry wooden sound that belongs only to this room. The left one is a little darker than the right, perhaps from handling, perhaps from having lived longer near the window where light and air have touched it differently. You set them apart and begin the comparison, heel to heel, toe to toe, curve to curve. The shape seems ordinary at first, but ordinary work still asks to be seen. That is one of the lessons you learn as a Salem Shoe Last Fitter in the 1920s. Most errors do not arrive waving for attention. They sit quietly in the familiar places, hidden by routine, waiting for a tired glance to pass over them. So you give the ordinary pair the same patience you would give a sample. The toe line is good, the waist is close, the heel seat needs clearing along one edge, where a slight roughness might trouble the counter later. You take the fine file and hold the last steady against the bench stop. The file moves in short, smooth passes, each one softening the edge without losing its clean boundary. The wood dust rises pale and dry, then settles along the dark grain of the bench. You brush the dust with your thumb and test the line. The heel now feels settled, neither sharp nor dull. You hold it beside its mate and nod, almost without meaning to. No one sees the nod. It is only the body acknowledging that a small question has been answered. Much of the day passes that way, in private agreements between the worker and the work. Outside the fitting room, the factory keeps its broader pulse. A cart rattles in the hall, loaded perhaps with uppers or soles, its wheels catching on the same uneven board each time it passes. You know that sound. You know the pause after it, when the worker pushing it shifts his grip. The building has many voices, and by afternoon you can place most of them without looking up. The Salem Shoe Last Fitter belongs to a trade that is both exact and forgiving, but never careless. Wood can be altered, a patch can be added, a ridge can be removed. Yet every change leaves a memory in the form, and every correction must answer to the shoe that will follow. You work in that calm middle place, where fixing is possible, but only if the hand stays honest. A new batch of lasts arrives from storage, colder than the room, and faintly dusty from their shelf. You wipe each one with a rag before checking it. The rag smells of old wood, oil, and the clean sourness of dried paste. It leaves the surface clearer under your hand. As each last emerges from dust, its shape becomes more legible, like a line of handwriting you can finally read. Some lasts are jointed, with a metal plate or hinge that allows the form to be removed from the finished shoe more easily after lasting. You check the mechanism gently, making sure it moves without looseness. The metal feels cool, and when it shifts, it gives a small click inside the wood. That sound matters. Too stiff, and the laster may struggle later. Too loose, and the form may not hold true. You open and close it once more. The click is clean. The parts settle back into place. You run a finger along the join, feeling for unevenness where leather might press. The joint is practical, hidden in the life of the shoe, but it must be sound. Industrial work often depends on such hidden usefulness, the little devices and habits that make the next step possible. By the window, a fly worries at the glass for a while, then stills. The afternoon is warm enough now that the air near the ceiling feels thicker than the air at your knees. Dust clings to the damp places at your wrist. You push your sleeves a little higher and return to the order. There is no need to rush. The day is already moving, and you are moving with it. The next ticket calls for a broader width. The difference seems generous after the narrow lasts of the previous hour. You take down the forms and feel the ball with your palm, appreciating the fuller spread. A broad last has its own dignity. It allows for feet that have worked, stood, widened and settled into themselves. Not every shoe wants to make the foot smaller. Some are made to let the foot be. In Salem's shoe trade, width marks carry quiet significance. They are not decorations on a ticket. They are the difference between ease and complaint, between a shoe worn daily and one left in a closet because it pinches by noon. You think of that as you check the forepart. The wood must hold enough fullness, without making the shoe look clumsy. Kindness and neatness must share the same curve. You compare the broad pair against the pattern note and find a slight flatness across the vamp area. It would make the upper sit too low. You choose a thin piece for building up, trim it carefully, and test its shape with the pad of your thumb. The leather piece is pliant but firm, smelling faintly of tannin and dust. It warms quickly while you hold it. The patch must taper until it becomes almost nothing at its edges. You shave it carefully before fixing it, because rough build-ups create new problems while solving old ones. The knife glides, stops, and glides again. Tiny scraps fall onto the bench like dry leaves. You fit the piece, then remove it, then fit it once more. The repetition is not failure. It is how the shape becomes exact. When the build-up is secured, the smoothing begins. The tool must not bite too deeply into the added piece. It must persuade it into the last surface. You work around the edge in small arcs, then lengthen the strokes as the transition disappears. Your palm tests the area. The shape now rises with a gentler confidence, and the broad last seems complete in a way it did not before. A person might think the last fitter's work is only mechanical, but we have been here long enough to know it carries judgment. You are always asking what the shoe is meant to be: a work shoe, a walking shoe, a dress shoe, a child's shoe, a stout shoe for weather, a lighter shoe for town. Each purpose changes the way fullness, curve, and firmness should be understood. The factory order may reduce that purpose to codes and notes, but the hands translate them back into form. You hold a ticket, then a last, then perhaps an upper, and the trade becomes physical again. The words on paper become a curve under your thumb. The style number becomes a toe line. The requested width becomes room for someone's foot at the end of a long day. As the second afternoon hour deepens, the noise from below seems to thicken, and we stay close beside the Salem Shoe Last Fitter while the work turns toward small repairs and older forms that have served through many orders. Older lasts have a different feel. They are often smoother where they have been handled, rougher where they have been strained, and more talkative under the fingers. You take one from the repair shelf and can tell at once that it has seen many seasons. The heel is dark with use. The toe bears scattered marks. The underside is freckled with holes from tacks pulled and driven again over years of production. You do not discard such a last lightly. Good wood, good shape, and a known form are worth caring for. The last has already proved itself in the line. It has made shoes that pass through the factory without trouble. If repaired well, it can keep doing so. There is thrift in this, certainly, but also a kind of respect for tools that have kept faith with workers. The repair needed is at the toe. A small chip has broken from one side, leaving an edge that would mark the leather if used as it is. You examine the chip, then the opposite last, then the master form. The missing place is small but awkward. You prepare to fill it, working slowly because a toe line is visible in the finished shoe in ways many other parts are not. The filler is pressed into place and shaped roughly at first. It looks wrong for several minutes, too proud, too pale, too obvious. Then the scraper begins to bring it down. The file follows. A finer smoothing follows that. Little by little, the repair stops being a patch and becomes a curve. The last returns, not new, but usable again, which is often the more honest form of renewal. You hold it under the light and turn it from side to side. The repaired edge catches no shadow it should not catch. Your thumb passes over it without stopping. The mate agrees. You mark the repair on the ticket and set the pair aside for review. There is satisfaction in bringing an old tool back into service. It feels less like making and more like keeping. Keeping is much of the work. Keeping order, keeping shape, keeping small errors from growing large, keeping tools sharp, notes legible, pairs together, standards close, and the pace human enough that attention does not slip away entirely. A Salem Shoe Last Fitter may not speak of the work in those terms, but the room itself teaches them. Every shelf, mark, and habit exists to keep something from being lost. The afternoon air now carries the smell of warmed dust. It sits lightly in the throat. Someone cracks the window again, and a cooler thread of air slips across the room. With it comes the sound of the street, softened but distinct. A horse snorting, a wheel striking stone, a man calling from somewhere below, and the faint clang of metal from a nearby yard. The outside world touches the room, then withdraws. You take a breath and return to the repair shelf. Another last has a loose hinge. The metal plate shifts more than it should when you press it. This is not work for scraping alone. You check the screw, the seating, the wear around it. The screwdriver fits into the slot with a small click. You tighten gently, test the movement and listen. The joint settles better, but not perfectly. A washer may be needed, or the hole may need filling and resetting later by someone assigned to heavier repairs. You make a note and place the last in the proper area. Knowing when not to force a repair is part of the craft. If you pretend a poor hinge is sound, another worker will pay for that pretense. So you name the trouble and let it travel to the right hands. The next older form is not damaged, only tired in a way wood can be tired. Its once clear lines have softened from use and cleaning. You compare it against the master and decide whether the softness still falls within tolerance. The word tolerance may sound technical, but in the room it means something simpler. How much difference can the shoe accept and still come out right? You measure, feel, and measure again. The last can remain in service, but only for a less demanding order. You mark it accordingly. It will not be used for a sample or a fine line, but it can serve plain work where its softened edges will not betray the shoe. This too is judgment. Not every tool must be perfect for every task. Some tools become suited to quieter duties. The factory itself works that way. Older benches support simpler jobs. Experienced workers handle difficult questions. Younger hands carry, sort, learn, and begin. Machines that once did the finest work may later do rougher work. Nothing is wasted quickly if it can still serve well. In a city where wages and materials matter, usefulness has a long life. By now, your hands smell strongly of wood and old leather. The repair work has disturbed dust that regular fitting leaves alone. It gets into the creases of your fingers. It dulls the shine of your nails. When you rub thumb against forefinger, there is a faint graininess there. The body feels the room's history as texture, and the texture stays with you until washing. A worker brings in a question from the lasting room. One pair from a recent batch is pulling unevenly, but only on the right shoe. You take the last from him and listen while he explains. He uses his hands as he speaks, showing where the leather resists. You nod because his description makes sense. The right last may carry fullness in the wrong place, or the upper may have been cut slightly off. The answer needs checking. You compare the last with its mate. The right one seems correct through the toe. The heel matches. At the instep, there is a subtle ridge, made more by uneven smoothing than by design. The laster's hand found it under strain. You can almost feel the moment he felt it downstairs. You mark the ridge and smooth it back, then hand the pair over with the note that the upper should be checked too. This is how departments speak through objects. The laster sends resistance. The fitter sends correction. The stitcher sends a sample. The cutter sends shapes that prove whether a pattern lies honestly on leather. No single worker holds the whole shoe. Not anymore. But the shoe still gathers a conversation from many hands. In that way, factory work remains human, even when divided. The late afternoon begins to lean toward evening again, and we follow the Salem Shoe Last Fitter from repair into a quieter run of matching, where the day's last orders ask for patience rather than strength. Matching is less noisy than repair. There is less scraping, more looking and feeling. You take two lasts of the same size and style, then two more, arranging them in pairs that truly belong together. Over time, working lasts can drift apart. One may be altered for a particular order and not restored. One may wear more at the heel. One may sit on a damp shelf and shift by the smallest degree. You line them up under the window. The toes point evenly toward the room. At a glance, they seem identical. But your work begins after that first glance. You sight along the top line, then the side, then the heel. You lift each pair, feel the weight, check the bottom markings, and compare the instep with the thumb's slow pass. The task is restful if the mind does not wander too far. The Salem Shoe Last Fitter is a guardian of pairs. That sounds simple, Yet the whole idea of shoes depends on pairing. Left and right must agree in style, size, pitch, height, and intention, while still honoring the natural difference between two sides of the body. You are not making mirror images. You are preserving a balanced conversation. The finished shoes must look like they belong together when placed in a shop box. A mismatched pair can trouble the eye before the foot ever enters. One toe may seem a shade higher. One heel may sit with a different confidence. One vamp may stretch smoother than the other. Customers may not know why the pair looks wrong, but they will feel hesitation. That hesitation can begin with the last left on the wrong shelf, so you give the matching work its due. The bench grows quieter around this task. Tools rest. Your hands do more lifting than cutting. The dust settles. You hear the clock again. You hear paper move when a small draft touches the tickets. You hear someone on the stairs, slower now than in the morning. Matching brings the room toward order, and order brings a gentle calm to the end of the day. One pair needs only cleaning. Another needs a note. A third cannot remain together because one last has been altered beyond its mate. You separate it without fuss, placing each where it can be reviewed. There is no sadness in that. Tools have working lives, and sometimes their paths divide. The point is not to preserve appearances, but to protect the shoe that would have suffered from them. The light lowers further. It turns amber along the edges of the shelves, catching dust in long slanting bands. The room feels almost old-fashioned in that light, though you are living inside its present. We, looking back, may call it history, but to you it is simply Thursday or perhaps Tuesday, with work to finish and a body ready for supper. History often feels ordinary while it is being lived. You pull the completed matches into a neat row. Tickets are tucked beneath. The rack accepts them one by one. The wood knocks softly as each pair settles beside another. There is a pleasure in the sound, low and final for the moment. Not final forever, of course. These lasts will be lifted again, used again, corrected again. But for now they are placed, and placed well. A small smudge of graphite marks your thumb. You rub it against your apron or work trousers, and it fades but does not vanish. The day leaves layers. The room leaves layers. If someone looked closely, they might read your work from cuff, hand, and sleeve. But no one needs to look closely. Everyone here carries similar evidence. The factory marks its people with quiet fairness. When the final bell comes, it does not startle you. You have been expecting it without watching. It rings through the building, and the machines begin their gradual fall into silence. Not all at once. One stops, then another. A belt slows, a wheel turns down. Voices rise a little as mechanical sound recedes. The building seems larger when the machinery quiets, as if the walls move farther apart. You finish the note already in your hand. A bell does not erase a half-written thought. Then you place the pencil down, align the ticket with its pair, and step back from the bench. The day has not been grand, but it has been complete enough. Repairs were made. Orders moved. Pairs were matched. Errors were caught before they traveled too far. This is the shape of useful work. Evening repeats itself, but never exactly. The hallway has a different crowd. The air outside has a different dampness. The sky may be low and silver or streaked with last light. You descend the stairs again, one hand near the rail, legs aware of standing. Someone talks about rain coming in. Someone else mentions a shipment delayed. You listen with half your mind, because the other half is still smoothing wood. At the door, the cool air meets your face. It feels clean after the room's dust. You breathe it in and smell Salem's evening. Coal smoke, brick, damp earth, harbor salt, and the faint food smells from houses beginning supper. The factory door closes behind you with a heavy wooden sound. Ahead, the streets hold their ordinary traffic, and you step into it, still carrying the day in your hands. But now, as we continue with the Salem Shoe Last Fitter, we let the evening pass gently and return to another kind of morning, one shaped by a special order that asks for care from the very first ticket. The special order waits on the bench when you arrive. It has been placed apart from the regular tray, which tells you enough before you read it. The paper is cleaner. the handwriting more deliberate. A sample line, perhaps. A correction for a buyer. A pair meant to settle a question before a larger run begins. You take off your coat, hang it on the peg, and come back to the ticket slowly. The note calls for a modified last based on an existing form, with a slightly lower heel pitch and a fuller forepart. Heel pitch is not a grand phrase in your room. It simply means the angle and balance that help the shoe sit properly when the heel is attached. Change it too much, and the whole shoe feels uneasy. Change it well, and no one notices except by comfort. You select the base last and place it beside the master. Then you gather the tools needed for more deliberate work. Calipers, rule, pencil, scraper, file, build-up pieces, and a small block used to steady the form. The bench becomes a focused place. Other orders wait, but this one asks for first attention. We stand quietly with you as the morning light touches the ticket's clean paper. The first step is seeing what must not change. The last already has a good toe line, and the heel seat is clean. The waist is acceptable. The forepart, however, needs more room, and the heel pitch must be lowered with care. You mark reference points lightly, because a pencil line can guide the tool while still allowing the hand to think. Dark, heavy marks can make the worker obey too bluntly. You compare the base last to another form from a similar style. This is not copying. It is listening to related shapes. A fitter often thinks through comparison, letting one form explain what another lacks. You hold them side by side, then end to end, then turn them over. The differences collect in your mind as pressure and angle, not just measurement. The heel pitch adjustment is delicate. Removing material in one place changes the way the last rests. Building in another can alter how the upper draws. You work slowly, checking the last on the flat surface of the bench, then against the reference, then under your palm. The process has the hush of concentration. Even the surrounding factory seems farther away for a while. A long shaving comes away from the lower heel area. It curls, breaks, and falls. You stop at once and check. The temptation with any visible progress is to continue, but the fitter knows visible progress can become visible error. You set the last down, test its sitting angle, and compare it to the note. A little more is needed, but not much. The next pass is lighter. The room smells fresh where the wood has opened. There is something almost clean in it, a pale, dry sweetness under the heavier leather air. You breathe it without thinking. Your hand steadies the last. The scraper moves. The adjustment appears gradually, not as an event, but as a settling into the shape the ticket asked for. When the heel rests properly, the last seems calmer on the bench. Now the forepart must be built. Fuller across the ball, the note says, but not clumsy. That is the difficult part. Fullness is easy if appearance does not matter. Elegance is easy if comfort does not matter. The fitter's trade lives between them. You cut two thin build-up pieces and taper them carefully, making one for each side, then compare them so the pair will grow together. Paste is applied in a thin film. The pieces are set and pressed. You wait long enough for them to hold, using the pause to check the mate. Waiting is part of the work too, though no one counts it loudly. The room gives you plenty to hear while you wait. The first machines below, a distant cough, wheels on the hall boards, the morning clock returning to its steady speech. When the pieces hold, shaping begins. The added fullness must rise naturally from the side of the last. You work the edges first, softening the borders until they no longer catch. Then you smooth the crown of the addition, testing often. Your palm moves over the shape again and again. You are teaching the last to become a slightly different last without losing itself. This special order would be easy to spoil by doing too much. The note asks for more room, not a new character. So you stop several times before you are sure you need to stop. You place the sample upper over the form and watch how it lies. The leather now draws with a more generous line across the forepart. It looks relaxed but not loose. That is the balance you were seeking. The mate must follow. Matching a modified pair is often harder than making the first correction. The first last teaches you, but the second must agree with it. You mark carefully, cut carefully, and keep both forms in view. Left and right have their natural differences, so agreement does not mean sameness. It means the finished pair will stand together with one intention. By mid-morning, The special order has absorbed more time than a regular run, but the time has not been wasted. You have moved slowly because the shoe will ask for that slowness later. A buyer might never know. A customer might never know. The line may enter production under a style number and become just another order in the tray. Yet for this morning, it has been a small event in the fitting room. The foreman returns to see the progress. He does not hover. He stands near the door, hat in hand, while you set the pair beside the sample upper. He looks, then touches the toe and forepart with a caution that suggests he trusts your hand more than his own in this matter. You explain briefly where fullness was added and how the heel pitch was adjusted. He listens, nods, and says it should go down for trial. The pair leaves the room. For a moment, the bench looks oddly bare where it rested. You brush away the dust it made and place the tools back in their ordinary positions. The special attention recedes, and the regular day flows in again. That shift from focused difficulty back to ordinary rhythm can feel pleasant, like stepping from a narrow lane into a familiar street. And as the trial pair moves downstairs, we remain in the fitting room with the Salem Shoe Last Fitter, where common orders continue waiting with the patience of wood and paper. The next ticket is plain enough to calm the mind. A standard size, a known style, a run already made earlier in the season. You take the lasts from the shelf and feel almost grateful for their familiarity. After the special order, the simple checks feel restful. Heel clean, toe sound, width correct, mate agreeable. The hands move steadily, and the breathing settles into the old pace. This is one of the hidden comforts of repetitive work. Difficulty visits, but routine receives you afterward. The bench does not ask you to remain in strain. It offers another pair, another small task, another chance to return to motion. You read, lift, feel, adjust, and set aside. The steps are known, and because they are known, the mind can rest inside them without fully sleeping. The city outside grows brighter. Morning errands begin. A wagon stops near the building, and you hear crates being shifted, the wood knocking against wood. Someone calls up from the street, and the words blur before reaching the fitting room. The sound becomes texture rather than message. Inside, the last in your hand has a small nick near the toe, and that requires more attention than anything outside. You smooth the nick, then test the toe with a scrap of leather pulled lightly across it. The scrap catches at first, then slides cleanly after another pass. This little test is practical and quiet. Leather tells the truth quickly when it meets roughness. You keep scraps for this reason, curled pieces left from the cutting room, each one still useful in the life of the factory. A younger worker asks if he may watch the next correction. Perhaps he has been carrying forms for weeks and is beginning to learn fitting. You make room beside the bench. You do not make a speech. You choose a last with a clear, simple high spot and let him see the process. First the hand finds it, then the pencil marks it, then the scraper removes less than the eye expects. You give him the last afterward. He feels the corrected place and nods uncertainly. He may not truly feel it yet. That is all right. The hand learns slowly, and no one can lend another person touch all at once. You tell him to compare it with the mate, and he does. His brow tightens. There, perhaps he begins to notice the difference. Teaching in such rooms often happens in fragments. A word here, a correction there, a tool handed over and taken back. You learn by standing close enough to see the angle of a wrist, by hearing someone say, "not so much," and by discovering later what they meant. The Salem Shoe Last Fitter passes knowledge along in this modest way, tucked inside the day's production. The young worker returns to his carrying, and you return to the tray. The room closes around the bench again. You may feel a small warmth from having shown him something. Not pride exactly, and not sentiment. More the feeling of seeing the work continue beyond your own hands. Trades survive because someone takes time, even in busy rooms, to let another person watch properly. The regular orders move onward. One pair needs a slight toe correction. One needs a note about hinge stiffness. One is set aside because its mate cannot be found on the proper shelf. That missing mate sends you to the racks, where you scan by size and style. The shelves smell dustier than the bench. Your fingers trail along wood ends, reading stamps and old marks in the dimmer light. You find the missing last two shelves lower than it should be. No one needs to be scolded. It is enough to restore it. You bring the pair back together and compare them. They have been apart, but not harmed by it. Their curves still agree. You place them in the correct tray and make the smallest mark on the ticket, mostly for your own record of the interruption. By noon, the trial pair from the special order has not yet returned. That means either the work below is going well, or it has not been reached. You do not speculate much. Speculation has little use at the bench unless it leads to a tool in the hand. You eat your lunch, listen to the room, and let the special order rest somewhere below, in another worker's care. The lunch pail opens with its familiar click. Bread, perhaps a little meat, perhaps a wedge of pie wrapped in paper if the household was generous or payday was near. The first bite tastes of home, more than food alone. Around you, others settle into their own small pauses. The factory still holds the workers, but for these minutes, it loosens its grip. Someone near the window reads a short item from a newspaper. The words drift through the room, touching on city news, prices, weather, and some public matter that seems both near and far. You listen with only part of yourself. The rest of you watches light on the bench and feels the pleasant heaviness that comes when the hands have stopped but have not yet forgotten their motion. After lunch, the special order returns. The laster has sent a note. The upper drew well across the forepart, but the heel balance may need the slightest change. You read the words twice, then take up the pair. This is not failure. This is how a trial speaks. The shoe has answered from the next stage, and now the last must answer back. The correction is very small. You check the heel pitch again, this time with the added knowledge of how the upper behaved. The adjustment required is less than a casual glance could judge. You remove a whisper of material and recheck the sitting angle. Then you compare both lasts, because a change to one part can make the pair drift apart in feeling even when the measurements remain close. You send them down again. The day continues around that exchange. This back and forth might happen more than once for a sample or a revised line. It requires patience from everyone involved. The cutter must trust the pattern. The stitcher must prepare the upper cleanly. The laster must report resistance honestly. The fitter must translate that report into wood. We can hear the shoe being made, not as a single act, but as a quiet conversation traveling up and down the stairs. And as afternoon gathers again over Salem, we stay within that conversation, following the shoe last fitter through the slow testing that turns a corrected form into a dependable working last. The slow testing begins with the corrected form resting alone on the bench, as if it has been given a little space to settle. You take it up only after reading the laster's note once more, because words from another worker deserve a clear hearing. The Salem Shoe Last Fitter works by touch, yes, but touch is guided by listening too, even when the listening comes through pencil marks on paper. The trial upper has come back with the last, lightly stretched now, carrying the memory of its first pull. You can see where the leather accepted the added fullness and where it still shows faint tension near the heel. It is not a flaw so much as a message. Leather speaks in shine, crease, drag, and spring. You hold it over the form again and let its surface show you what the wood has done. The corrected heel sits better than before, but the back line wants a little more ease. You mark the place with a soft pencil curve. Then you pause. This is the kind of moment where the body might want to finish quickly, especially after the same pair has returned more than once. But the fitter's patience is part of the toolkit, and impatience has no proper place to stand in this room. You remove almost nothing. The scraper moves with less pressure than the weight of a spoon. A faint powder appears, not even a shaving at first, just a pale dulling of the surface. You test again. The upper lowers over the heel with better agreement. Not loose, not slack, just less troubled. The line looks calmer, and the leather no longer brightens in that narrow, strained place. You make the same adjustment to the mate, though not exactly the same cut. Left and right ask for different motions. The hand learns to be fair without being blunt. You compare them under the window, turning each one until the light touches the heel line. The pair now seems to stand with one intention. You attach the note and send it downstairs again, where another set of hands will give the next answer. For a while, the returned sample leaves the room and the regular work comes forward. The ticket tray has not waited for special attention to end. Orders still need fitting, racks still need checking, a hinge still needs review. This is how factory life keeps a person humble. No single task, however careful, stops the river. When one last leaves the bench, another is already waiting in the shallow water of the day. You pick up a stout form meant for a heavier shoe. Its wood feels broad and certain in the hand. The toe is not delicate, the heel is firm. The waist has less refinement than a dress shoe, but it must still be true. A sturdy shoe may forgive a plain appearance, but it does not forgive poor balance. People who wear strong shoes often stand long hours, and standing tells the truth about fit. The Salem Shoe Last Fitter checks the bottom first. The last must sit flat enough for the work it will meet, and the pitch must serve the heel that will be attached later. You place it on the bench and press lightly. It rocks, only a little, but enough to be noticed. You check the mate. That one sits cleanly. So the first form comes back to your hand for closer study. The unevenness may come from wear rather than original shape. You examine the underside, where tack holes, dents, and old pressure marks have changed the surface over time. A rough spot near the heel catches your eye. You smooth it, then set the last down again. It settles better. Not perfectly, but enough to show the main trouble has been found. Another pass will likely finish it. The tool's edge makes a dry, shallow sound over the underside. It is not as graceful as smoothing a toe, but it matters. Much of a shoe's dignity begins where no one looks. The underside of the last guides the lower work, the pulling, the tacking, the setting of shape before soles and heels complete the object. Hidden accuracy supports visible neatness. The factory knows this, even when customers do not. You test once more. The rocking has stopped. The last sits with the calm weight of a thing properly placed. You compare it to the mate, then mark the pair ready. A small correction, a small result, a small protection for the next stage. The room is built from such smallness. If we stay with it gently, it becomes large enough to rest in. The afternoon light slips over the bench in a broad, pale band. Dust from the earlier repair lies along the edge, and you brush it into your palm before tipping it into the waste tray. The dust is soft but dry, with tiny rough pieces hidden in it. It smells of wood, old polish, leather, and time. When you wipe your palm on the cloth, a faint powder remains in the lines of your skin. Someone brings coffee from downstairs, or perhaps only hot water with a little color left from morning grounds. It is warm enough to hold between both hands. You drink a few mouthfuls, and the heat settles into your chest. The cup tastes faintly metallic. The handle is bent. Nothing about it is fine. And yet in the middle of the afternoon it feels generous. You return to the bench. The trial sample still has not come back, and that is acceptable. Some answers take time. You pull the next ticket and find a child's shoe order. The lasts are smaller, lined on a lower shelf, their shapes almost tender in the hand. A child's last is not merely a smaller adult form, it has its own proportions, softer in the toe, broader in certain places, made for growing feet that do not yet know stillness. The small lasts make a different sound when set down, lighter, quicker, almost like blocks in a schoolroom. But the work is not a game. Children's shoes must allow movement, growth, and the rough treatment of streets, yards, stairs, and weather. A poor fit can trouble a child who has no words for the trouble, only a wish to pull at the shoe or leave it unlaced. You check the toe room carefully. There must be enough length and fullness without making the shoe clumsy. Parents may want shoes to last, and growing feet make that wish understandable. Still, too much extra space can trip and rub. The last fitter stands quietly between economy and comfort, shaping the standard that will help the finished shoe answer both as well as it can. One little last has a rough place near the side, where an old tack or careless strike left a raised splinter. You feel it before you see it. The splinter is small, but a child's upper may be softer leather, more likely to take an impression. You smooth the place with extra care. The scraper seems large against the little form, so your hand changes its pressure and pace. Tools feel different when the work is small. The same scraper that moves broadly over an adult last must become delicate here. Your fingers shift closer to the blade for control. The last rests partly in your palm and partly against the bench. Shaving by shaving, the roughness vanishes. You test with the scrap lever, and it glides without catching. The Salem Shoe Last Fitter may spend hours without thinking of the people who will wear the shoes, yet certain orders bring them closer. Children's lasts do that. You may picture small feet stepping through puddles, kneeling on floors, kicking at stones, growing before the shoe has had enough time to wear out. The image is not sentimental in the room. It is simply another way the work connects to life beyond the factory. By late afternoon, the trial sample returns again. This time the note is brief. Drawers clean. Send to pattern room for record. You read the words and let the smallest satisfaction pass through you. The pair has answered well enough. Now it must be documented, perhaps copied, perhaps used as a guide for a wider run. Your corrections will become part of the line, translated into repeatable work. You take a moment to clean the sample pair carefully. Dust is brushed from the toe. Pencil marks are clarified where needed, not left smudged into uncertainty. Notes are rewritten in clean language, because a corrected last must carry its story forward without depending on your memory. The modifications are listed plainly. Fuller forepart. Adjusted heel pitch. Slight ease at backline. Enough words, no more. The pair is placed apart for the pattern room. It looks ordinary now, which is a sign of success. A well-corrected last does not display its labor. It simply stands there, ready to be used, as if it had always meant to be that shape. You return to the child's order and finish the row, but the sample remains in the corner of your sight, like a quiet task completed. As the day leans once more toward evening, we follow the Salem Shoe Last Fitter into the habit of record keeping, where paper, pencil, and memory preserve what the hands have learned. The records are not grand books bound for libraries. They may be cards, tickets, ledgers, tags, or marked envelopes, practical things made to survive handling more than admiration. You pull the relevant sheet close and copy the needed details with care. The pencil moves slowly over the paper, leaving gray strokes that shine faintly before dulling. Your handwriting is shaped by benches, not desks, but it is clear enough for work. A style number is written out in words or figures on the factory paper, though in our telling we let it remain unnamed, because the number matters less than what it holds. It holds the last shape, the width, the corrections, the relation to a sample, the memory of what the laster reported, and what the fitter changed. Paper remembers what hands may forget after sleep, interruption, or a busy season. You compare the written note against the actual last. This is a habit worth keeping. Records can lie by accident. A line left out, a mark misunderstood, a correction written on the wrong ticket. So you check the thing itself against the words about the thing. In the quiet trade of fitting, truth rests between object and record, and both must agree before the pair moves onward. The ledger smells of paper dust and handling. Its corners are darkened by thumbs. Some pages hold old notes in different hands, from workers who may have moved on, retired, fallen ill, or taken jobs in other shops. Their pencil marks remain in the factory's daily life. You may not think of this as history, but we can feel the layering of human attention in those pages. A master last, a sample last, and a working last all belong to different levels of memory. The master preserves the standard. The sample tells a story of design and correction. The working last bears the repeated contact of production. The fitter moves among these memories, keeping them from drifting too far apart. It is a quiet stewardship done with ordinary tools under ordinary light. The afternoon grows dimmer while you write. Someone lights a lamp, or perhaps the electric bulbs overhead begin to show their pale strength as daylight weakens. The room changes under artificial light. Curves flatten unless held at the right angle. Shadows gather under the forms differently. You prefer daylight for fine comparison, but the day does not always arrange itself around preference. Under the lamp, the wood appears warmer and less exact. You bring the last close, tilt it, and use touch more than sight. The palm becomes even more useful now. It reads beyond shadow. It finds raised places the lamp softens. It confirms what the eye cannot quite separate. This is why the fitter's hand remains central, even in a factory full of devices. Measures and rules. You finish the record and tie it with the sample pair. The string pulls tight with a slight rasp against paper. The knot is plain, secure, easy to open later. You set the pair on the designated shelf. Apart from regular production, its work is not finished, but your part in today's correction is. Tomorrow, someone may trace the changes, perhaps make a duplicate, perhaps decide the line is ready. The regular bench waits with the last hour's tasks. You turn back to them with a sense of returning from paperwork to wood. Paper is necessary, but the hand prefers surfaces. The next last is cool, where it has been untouched all day. You hold it until it warms slightly. The ticket calls for a routine check, and the plainness of that instruction is almost restful. Routine checks at day's end require discipline. Tiredness makes the ordinary blur. You slow yourself deliberately, giving each pair the same sequence. Markings: mate, toe, ball, instep, heel, bottom, hinge, if present, ticket, tray. The order holds you upright when your mind might otherwise wander towards supper or weather. A sequence can be a kindness when the day is long. You find one last with a crack beginning near the top, a fine line where the wood has opened along the grain. It is not yet dangerous to the work, but it cannot be ignored. You press gently and see the line widen by the smallest amount. This pair must be removed from use until repaired. A crack allowed to grow can fail under strain, perhaps in another worker's hands. You tag it clearly. The pencil note says what must be known. Crack at top. Hold for repair. You place it away from active orders. The act is simple, but it prevents confusion. A tired worker tomorrow will not lift it by mistake. A laster downstairs will not discover the weakness during a pull. Such quiet prevention is one of the least visible parts of skill. The factory's evening sounds begin again. A door closes below. A machine slows, then catches and continues. A few voices lift with the relief of nearing the end. The light outside is now soft grey, with perhaps a line of gold if the weather is clear. Salem's roofs and chimneys beyond the glass seem to settle closer together, as if the city too is preparing to draw in for the night. You clean the bench more slowly than usual, because the records took time, and the last orders were fussy. The brush moves through dust. Scraps are gathered. Completed tickets are stacked. A tool rolls slightly when set down, and you stop it with 2 fingers before it reaches the bench edge. Even tired hands can be quick in small ways. The body protects the tools it knows. And when the evening bell finally releases the room, we leave the corrected sample on its shelf and follow the Salem Shoe Last Fitter into the next day's quieter work, where repetition returns with its own gentle gravity. The following day is damp. You know it before you reach the factory door. Salem's streets hold the smell of rain in their stones, and the air carries a cool wetness that settles into cuffs, hair, and coat seams. The factory windows are dull from the outside, pale squares in brick. Inside, the damp has touched the wood, the paper, and the temper of the room in small but noticeable ways. You hang your coat and rub your hands together before taking up the first last. The wood feels a little different, not wet, but less dry, with a faint heaviness in the surface. The paper tickets have softened at the corners. The dust on the bench lies flatter. Damp days do not stop the work, but they ask the fitter to pay attention to how materials answer the air. The Salem Shoe Last Fitter begins with the racks closest to the window, because those forms feel the weather first. You check a pair used often in a medium-width line. The left one is unchanged. The right one feels faintly raised along a patch made weeks before. The damp may have lifted the edge. You bring it under the lamp and confirm with your thumb. A small repair asks to be renewed. The smell of paste is stronger on a damp morning. It rises sharply when opened, cutting through leather and dust. You loosen the patch, clean the surface, and reset it with better contact. Then you smooth the edge after it has taken hold. The work is small, but it belongs to the day's weather as much as to the last itself. The room and the sky have entered the task. Rain ticks softly against the windows, not hard, just enough to make the glass sound alive. The factory below gathers its usual noise, but the rain adds another layer, a fine and patient tapping over the broader mechanical pulse. You work under that sound, and it steadies the morning. Every scrape of the tool seems a little quieter with rain behind it. Damp leather behaves differently too. It may stretch more willingly, or hold a softness that changes how it draws over the form. The fitter does not control the whole journey of leather through the factory, but you know enough to anticipate trouble. If a last is already too full in one place, damp leather may hide the issue at first and reveal it later. If too narrow, the material may forgive briefly, then complain when dry. You check the day's orders with that in mind. A run that would be ordinary in dry weather receives extra attention at the ball and instep. You feel for patches, old fills, soft edges, and any place where moisture might have encouraged movement. This is not anxiety. It is practical weather sense. Every trade that touches natural materials learns to work with the day it has been given. The first few hours pass in a rain-muted rhythm. Tickets soften under your hand. Tools feel cooler. The window light stays grey and even, without strong shadows, which helps some comparisons and hides others. You turn each last more often, using the lamp and the palm together. The room smells closer than usual, as if the damp has lowered the ceiling. A worker from the cutting room mentions that a hide stretched strangely this morning. He says it while passing the door. Not as a formal report, but you remember it. Leather and lasts meet later, and a strange stretch can become a question at your bench. The factory's knowledge travels in remarks like that, half conversation and half warning. You keep the remark gently in mind. By mid-morning, a batch arrives for a line already known to be particular. The shoes are neat, with a narrower waist and a toe that must stay clean. Damp weather may make their uppers more compliant, but the finished line still depends on sharp enough definition. You take down the appropriate lasts and check the toe edges carefully. A soft edge here would make the shoe look weary before it is born. You refine one toe with the file, then polish it smooth with the finer abrasive. The abrasive makes almost no sound, just a dry hush under the rain. Your hand moves in small circles, then longer strokes. When you test with the scrap leather, the piece slides over the toe cleanly and takes the curve without catching. You set that last aside and begin its mate. The mate needs more work. It has a shallow hollow just behind the toe, the kind that can make leather dip when pulled tight. You mark it, fill lightly, and smooth the fill down until the hollow disappears. The correction is so slight that anyone passing by would see almost nothing happening. But under a finished upper, that slightness matters. A smooth vamp can begin with a repair no wider than a fingernail. As the rain continues, the room feels almost separate from the city, though Salem is just beyond the glass. You hear fewer street sounds now. Wheels pass with a wet roll rather than a dry rattle. Footsteps below are slower, coats drip near the entrance. The factory becomes a warm, breathing enclosure, full of work, protected from weather, but never fully free of it. You take lunch with rain still at the windows. The food tastes better in damp weather, perhaps because the body wants warmth. Coffee steam rises faintly from a cup, carrying a bitter smell that cuts through leather. Someone jokes mildly about shoes being the only sensible thing to make on a day when everyone's feet are wet. The joke is soft, not sharp, and it fades easily into the meal. After lunch, a pair comes back from downstairs with a moisture-related complaint. The upper drew well in the morning, then seemed to slacken too much while waiting. The last may not be the only reason, but it must be checked. You take it up and feel the forepart. It is not too narrow. If anything, it may be allowing too much ease for that leather in this weather. The correction is delicate because tomorrow may be dry. You do not want to alter the last for a temporary mood of the air unless the shape truly calls for it. You compare it against the master and find that it was already slightly full from an older adjustment. That older fullness, acceptable on most days, may be too generous with this leather. You mark the last for limited use rather than cutting at once. This is an example of restraint. The tool remains on the bench. You write a note instead. Use with firmer upper only. Review before full run. The last is not wrong, but it is not right for every condition. Such distinctions keep the fitter's work from becoming blunt. Not every problem asks for wood to be removed. Sometimes the answer is classification, memory, and a careful warning to the next person. The afternoon brings more rain, then a soft clearing. The windows brighten without sun. The room lifts a little. Damp coats downstairs begin to smell of wool and street water. The lasts near the window slowly lose their surface coolness. You continue checking the batch, aware that the day's materials may change again before the shift ends. Work has to remain flexible without becoming uncertain. A messenger brings word that the special sample from yesterday has been accepted for a small production trial. That means the corrected pair may need duplicates. You receive the news with quiet attention. It does not change the last in your hand, so you finish that first. Then you pull the sample record, the modified pair, and the base forms that will be used to make the next working copies. Duplicating a corrected last is a patient business. The sample becomes teacher now. You set it beside the fresh base form and transfer the relevant marks. Fuller forepart, adjusted heel pitch, ease at backline. Each phrase must become shape again. You have done it once, but the second time is not automatic. A copied correction must live in the new wood, not merely imitate pencil lines. The fresh base last is cleaner, less marked by use. Its surface takes pencil clearly. You compare it to the corrected sample, then begin with the heel pitch. The rain has left the room cooler, and the wood seems to cut crisply. The scraper pulls thin shavings from the lower heel. You stop often, testing the angle, matching it to the accepted form. The work has the calm precision of tracing a remembered path. Next comes the forepart build-up. You cut pieces to match the sample's fullness, but you do not trust the eye alone. The palm compares one curve against the other. You move between the two forms, left hand holding the sample, right hand holding the new last. Then switch hands to be sure the sensation is not misleading you. The body can have habits of pressure, and good work checks even those. The first duplicate begins to resemble the sample, not exactly at first, then more closely. The added piece smooths into the side. The heel settles lower. The back line eases. You set them together and look at the silhouettes under the window light. They are not twins, but they belong to the same thought. That is what a production trial needs. As evening approaches on the damp day, we remain with the Salem Shoe Last Fitter while the accepted sample begins to multiply. Slowly, carefully, one working form at a time. The duplicate form rests beside the accepted sample, and for a while you leave them there together, letting the last light find their matching curves. The rain has stopped outside, but the windows still hold a soft grey shine, and Salem seems hushed beyond the glass. You run your palm once more over the forepart, then over the heel, feeling not for perfection, but for that calm agreement that tells the hand its work can rest. The wood is smooth, the note is tied, and the shape is ready. Around you, the fitting room begins to loosen from the day. The scraper is wiped clean and placed where morning will find it. The file returns to its hook. The calipers close with a small, neat sound. Tickets are stacked beneath their pairs, and the bench slowly clears until only the ordinary marks remain, the scratches, stains, and pale dust caught in the grain. You brush the last shavings into the tray, and the room seems to breathe out with you. The shelves hold their rows of wooden feet in the fading light. Some will go downstairs tomorrow. Some will wait a week. Some have already served more shoes than anyone remembers. In the quiet, they look less like factory stock and more like patient companions, shaped by labor and kept by hands that knew where every curve belonged. The Salem Shoe Last Fitter leaves no grand signature behind, only order, smoothness, and a path made easier for the next worker. You put on your coat, and the fabric settles over tired shoulders. The room is cooler now. The smell of leather and wood dust remains, but it has softened, as if even scent can grow sleepy at the end of a shift. One last glance returns to the bench, to the tied sample, to the tools resting in their places. Nothing calls out. Nothing is unfinished in a way that troubles the night. The door closes gently behind you, and the fitting room stays still. The lasts wait in their rows. The tools are where they belong, and so are you.